And welcome to this Q&A session to go along with our screening of Gift. My name is Joanne Parsont. I am the Director of Education for the California Film Institute. It's my great pleasure to have you join us for today's Q&A with the Director of Gift, Robin McKenna. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you.
Great to see you here. Thank you for your gift of this wonderful film. I'm sure I'm not the first person to use that line, but I'm going to say it anyway, because it was really just a beautiful and moving film. Just a few, before we kind of dive in, I'll ask you a few questions, just, a reminder for everyone, whether it's your first time here with us on Zoom or you've been to many, 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 many Zooms, as many of us have, that the way we will run this is if you have a question, please just click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, or in some cases it might be at the top if you're on another device. Just click on that and type your question into that window, and then I will see them and I will promptly, or at some point, weave them in and ask Robin your question. If you have comments that you would like to add, you can put those in the chat. Just check on the chat icon. Please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A so I'll see them. It's hard to monitor both the chat and the Q&A at the same time, but of course you want to hear anything you have to say about the film or about, your thoughts around, the subjects of the film, and want to make sure that your questions get into the proper Q&A spot so I can see them. So why don't we just jump in, Robin, and maybe if you could talk a little bit about I'm curious what your personal experience with or connection to Lewis Hyde's book was that sort of put you on this journey to make this film in the first place.
So I didn't know the book before. I had read his book, Trickster Makes This World, about the trickster myth and creativity, which I also loved. And I just found this on the bookshelf, and there was a quote on the cover from Margaret Atwood saying, "The best book I know of for talented but unacknowledged creators, a masterpiece." And I was intrigued by that, and I picked it up. And it was just such a strange combination of kind of fairy tales, folklore, poetry, anthropology. And I think it kind of appealed to a side of me that was like interested in systems and how we organize and alternative economies and this kind of radical subversion of, the free market capitalist kind of model. But also it was about poetry and this kind of inner gift that passes through us. And about halfway through the book, you realize that the whole first section has kind of been a metaphor for this idea of the inner gift, the creative gift. So the first part talks about gift economies and systems and how the gift circulates and is handed on from person to person. And then you realize he's talking about how our creative gifts need to pass through us. And there was something about, Lewis Hyde started as a poet. He wrote this when he was a young poet, kind of asking himself why he spent so much time laboring on these poems when his landlord didn't care about his poems the day his rent was due. So there was something about the poetry of the way he had structured the book that was like, wow, it was just, there was so much depth and kind of mystery to it that it really struck me and appealed to all these different parts of myself, like the part of like the meditator, the creator, and the kind of like revolutionary who is thinking there must be a different way to organize ourselves.
Cool. And so at what point did you know that you wanted to, or perhaps you needed to translate the core idea of the book into a film?
Well, I think like I've always been drawn to more observational, character-driven filmmaking. And in some ways that's kind of like Lewis is talking about real situations and people and stories, but then also kind of weaving his ideas through those stories. And so I was intrigued by that idea of trying to make an essay film that was also kind of a character-driven film and weaving the ideas through the characters' stories, which is kind of a strange way to make a film. It took me a long time to find the right producer to work with. And a lot of people were like, can you give me other examples of films that are both of those things? And I was like, there aren't really that many that I know of. But I think it was also kind of, the book came out in the early 80s before the internet really even existed. And I started thinking, is this idea too kind of romantic, too idealistic? And then, I read the Wikipedia entry on gift economy, and I realized that there's all these very current examples, like they talk about hacker culture as a gift culture. Apparently this book is very big in Silicon Valley for that reason. You know, the social media people love to talk about this idea of a gift economy in social media. And, you know, Burning Man now since the book was written. So there was all these very current zeitgeisty things that were happening. And I realized that it was something that was actually very of the moment right now. So I went out and found the Potlatch story in BC. I met this family and this young guy who was like 30 years old and saving up for 4 years to give everything away. And it was really meeting him that convinced me that I could make a film following character-driven stories and kind of bringing the ideas through their stories.
So how did you, so once you had the Potlatch story, how did you choose the other different communities and artist projects?
Well, I had been once to Burning Man, and I knew that I wanted to try to have a Burning Man story. I think there was always a challenge there for the Burning Man, you know, like obviously it's a more kind of hedonistic, it's like a lighter story compared to the other ones, but I knew that cinematically it would be a great juxtaposition between this kind of ancient tradition and this kind of futuristic, you know, post-apocalyptic desert landscape. So I knew I would have those two. And then the artist character who ended up being Lee Ming-wei, it was a hard one because it really could have been any writer or artist, you know, to fulfill that role. But I had read about Ming-wei's work a long time ago in Utne Reader, like 20 years ago. And something came to mind about how a lot of his work is inspired by Buddhist ritual. And this idea of kind of blurring the boundaries between art and life. And I thought, who is that artist? And I kind of looked him up, and you know, with the magic of Google, I looked up him and Lewis Hyde, and it turned out that they knew each other. Lewis actually wrote the introduction to the catalog for Ming-wei's exhibition at the Isabella Stewart Gardner in Boston. And Ming-wei has been hugely influenced by Lewis's book and like carries it with him when he travels. So Lewis connected me with Ming-wei. I was already in touch with Lewis. And Ming-wei was reticent at first because he wondered how the camera would affect the interactions between people because it's such a kind of intimate connection. But eventually Lewis actually really advocated for us. He said, come on, it's gonna be a great project. You should do it. And then the Rome story was the last one I found, and it was like, it was really Googling gift economy. It was some kind of like search thing that came up where I think Giorgio, the mustache guy who kind of came up with the idea for the museum, was doing an interview, and he talked about how the place functioned as a kind of gift economy. So I just came across it. I think he doesn't even speak English. It was like he was speaking Italian, it was translated. And I just started looking at these pictures of this place. And there was something about the edginess of that story that was I was kind of aware that there was a danger with this film of something being too kind of romantic and sweet. You know, it's like, it's all a very beautiful idea, but how does it fit into the reality, which is pretty dark, that we've been living in the last few years, you know? So I think there was an element of like the migrant crisis, the current reality in Europe, that I liked that it brought that reality to the forefront, while also doing something so kind of quixotic and utopian in a way.
Well, and one of the things I love is how the different projects and communities are scattered, you know, throughout the world. So they're, you know, in very different regions of the world. So I'm wondering, did you encounter different attitudes or perspectives around the sort of the gift economy or the gift art as gift concept within those different cultures?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, with the potlatch, it's kind of something that's always been part of them. And I think there's a very strong sense of like, I mean, there's a whole different system of values, which was kind of amazing to me considering it's the same country that I live in, you know, but it's this sense that like wealth is meant to be circulated. It's not meant to be hoarded. And, you know, it's kind of frowned upon if you have like a big fancy truck or a big house, because it's like, oh, you're not leaving a name for your grandchildren, you know? And the kind of work that they labor towards, the creative work that they do, it's also kind of in service to this, I don't know, it's part of that circle of gifts, you know? the Burning Man thing is interesting because they talk about how they kind of consciously created that ethos with people. And, you know, Larry Harvey, who's like one of the kind of founders of Burning Man, controversially, says that he read Lewis Hyde's book. And at first they banned commerce, but then they really tried to proactively encourage this idea of gifting. And he says that at first there was a lot of resistance to it because people were like, no, you know, like, no, I don't want to owe you anything. So they didn't want to take, you know, and it was like, no, really, like, it's all about the gifting and I just want to give you something. So I think it's been pretty, you know, there's a lot of criticism of Burning Man. There's a lot to be said about it, but that, like, the spirit of imagination and the amount of labor that goes into those projects people do, it's like, it is, you know, to put it alongside the potlatch of just like the years of preparation and devotion that it takes. There is a thing of this like long-term labor, you know? And I mean, for me, all the stories are very personal too. It's like when, you know, the bee girl who's building the bee car is asking herself, like, do I keep going or do I cut my losses? Like, is this crazy? You know, like, that's definitely me. It took me 5 years to make this film. And it's like, am I totally crazy? Like, what am I doing? And I mean, in Rome, there's an interesting thing where, you know, artists are kind of honored to be, they could offer to come or they could be invited, but to come and have a chance to spend time in this place, and especially the ones who, like you see in the film, who get a chance to interact with some of the kids and the Roma community, especially because it's a community that most people in Italy really have like no contact with and who are so hated, you know? And then, you know, Mingwei has his own mysterious approach to, you know, opening the channel and receiving the gifts that come through him.
Well, and so that it's interesting to me, to the dichotomy of seeing Mingwei's art projects that are all about gifting and the process between strangers, but within the structure of a major museum where, you know, the high value of art is, you know, totally inherent. And like, I'm just curious about the tension between those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was another thing I loved about having the Rome story alongside the Mingwei, you know, like he really is, especially in the last few years, he's been in like Venice Biennale, most of the big world biennales, and he's become very established. And that kind of like fancy museum world, you know, he is trying to kind of like bring art outside the walls of the museum, but, you know, to an extent that's also limited, right? And just the contrast with this place where like the kids are playing soccer inside the walls of the museum, and like the sculptures are getting dented by the balls that they're kicking around. And I love that kind of like the grittiness versus the kind of perfect sanitized indoor world.
Yeah, it's a really nice contrast to see those two different, and that the other, you know, in Italy, that, you know, they're living in it, that it's a lived-in space, a lived-in museum, where, you know, which is sort of the opposite of how you feel when you're in, you know, a museum where you can't touch anything, and, you know, everything is very rarefied, and there's people guarding, you know, it's such a different. It's a really nice balance. But I'm just curious about other Mingwei's work, that, you know, of where he is taking that out, you know, what you've seen as far as him taking it outside of the museum space.
Well, I mean, projects like the Money for Art one, where he's folding up the bills, that was one of his first projects coming out of school. He actually went to the San Francisco Art Institute, I think.
Which is closing, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, I'm sorry to bring, that was just sad. Yes, they are closing, yeah, for good. It's 150.
Because of the pandemic, or just?
I think they were having problems before, and
oh, wow.
They just can't, yeah. Anyway, wow. Sorry, sad note. Life in San Francisco, here we are.
Yeah, so that was really like in the San Francisco kind of cafe scene, like the way you see him, you know, he would sit there in a coffee shop and wait till somebody approached him, and just kind of, you know, whoever he met. And he likes to tell the story of one of the original people he gave it to was a homeless person. He gave it to like 9 different people, and then he asked if he could follow them, right, for a year and see what happened. And he said this one homeless guy treasured this little sculpture that he had made and kept it in his wallet, even when he was in the streets and, you know, asking people for money. And since then, Mingwei comes back often to San Francisco, and he sees the same guy, and he said he's given him like 10 of these sculptures, and he keeps all of them in his wallet, and he's really proud to have them. And other people are like, the young waitress was just like, she used it to buy herself a pint of ice cream and like something to eat.
So I'm curious to what the response of each of the the prime subjects to the film. I'm presuming that they've all seen it and just sort of wondering and what their if there was any sense of interaction or connection between the different subjects during the making of the film, or what their response was in having seen the other communities.
Interaction, no. They're really like disparate worlds. They finally have all seen it because in November I finally brought it back to Rome. It took a long time to get Italian subtitles done for the film, but we screened it at Metropolis with a lot of the kids who made it most of the way through. And at the Macro Museum of Contemporary Art in Rome. So that was great, like kind of closing of the circle. And Metropolis is still there, although the last I heard, they've been placed on a list of places that are priorities to evict by the new, like the government keeps getting crazier in Rome and in Italy. So, I mean, now we'll see, because it's been, whole pandemic has changed everything, but their situation has become more precarious since the film was made, but they're still there. Yeah, we had a great big premiere at the Castro Theater in San Francisco. That was our US premiere with a lot of the Burning Man community and a whole great conversation. The Potlatch community, I went back before the film was finished, but just to show them that storyline. But I don't know if you noticed the dedication at the end of the film, but Marcus actually passed away.
Oh, no.
2 years after we filmed with him, in a kind of sudden and tragic way that was totally unexpected for everybody. And so it definitely had a bittersweet feeling going back there. In some ways it was so precious that we had spent that time with him and captured that, but it's been a huge loss for his community, which is a small, close-knit community. So it's been hard for some of the people to even sit and watch the whole film.
That is tragic. So just a reminder to all of you who are watching too, I'm going to keep, rambling on with questions, but if you came in late and do have questions for Robin, please just go ahead and type them into the Q&A tab that you can find on your screen, and I will gladly ask them. So I'm curious, given the fact, obviously, that film is also a form of art making and creativity, of course. How much did the concept of art as a gift feed into your own artistic process in making the film?
Well, I think there was something very liberating reading the book about that, like this question of like, why am I doing this? Why am I spending so much time on something? And like, just kind of thinking of it in a different way. But I mean, film is an interesting medium because it's not like poetry. It's not as small and personal, and it's not like being able to pick up your guitar and just play. It's like, it's so collaborative, and it's also so expensive, right? It's like, it's a big complicated machine.
Right.
So I mean, I did ask myself a lot of questions as I was making the film. Like, my friend Mark Akbar, who made The Corporation and Manufacturing Consent, was around when I was starting to make the film, and he was like, what a great idea, The Gift. And he goes to Burning Man, and he was like, so when it's finished, are you going to charge people for it? Or like, isn't that kind of weird? And I was like tormented by that for a long time. I was like, that's true. I mean, we have to find a way to like reinvent distribution. But I mean, of course you can put something for free online, right? But it is kind of a film that's meant to be seen on the big screen and kind of experienced, and ideally experienced collectively. Like there's something about that experience of coming out and like giving all your attention to something. And so I just, like, it took so long to make the film, and it was so hard, that I finally just came to terms with like, making documentaries, you never make money. And it was kind of a potlatch for me to spend 5 years making this film. At times I like couldn't even afford to pay rent and do all the traveling I was doing. So I was like hosted by a lot of friends here and there, like living in different places. And it was a crazy journey, So, there's been all different levels of screenings, community screenings and bigger kind of theatrical, and it's been interesting experimenting with all those different levels. And the film works great as a kind of community-based thing where people get together and have conversation after. But, you know, there's definitely economics to the whole film thing that are, it's tricky to get around that completely, you know?
Well, and so given, how does it feel now, I guess, that we can't show it on the big screen and that we have to do it this way online, and knowing that people aren't necessarily, you can't control that sense of collective conversation or experience. And how do you, so does it, are you able to sort of reframe in your own mind too of how the film works within that context, and how, and just, I'm curious too, how we're sort of, how the whole concept of, giving is changing in this time of social distancing and the way we're all trying to adjust to that. How do you see it kind of fitting into, today's reality?
Well, I mean, to be honest, this is basically the first online screening of the film. It will be coming out online more widely later this summer for everybody. But I mean, so far, like, that'll be a new step.
Mm.
I think it's great to bring people together in conversation like this, but it'll be a new practice to figure out how we connect. I mean, so much of it is about this kind of intimate connection and kind of like that image of like a hand touching another hand, you know? So I don't know.
Gloved hand touching another gloved hand.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm wondering, are you seeing that the artistic community is, are you seeing that they're basically shifting and pivoting into how they are, how the gift economy now works in this current structure? That everyone's kind of shifting how they're functioning on a day-to-day basis, and how businesses are running, and how we're running the theater differently. We have to do it online. Are you seeing that within the artistic space with some of these different types of projects?
I mean, some of them. I think, some people have really tried to pivot and find new models right away like that. And I have heard of some cool experiments, like theater companies doing like dinner at home and, but I mean, I think part of what's interesting is also this kind of forced pause right now. I mean, I don't know if everyone has gotten to that point of like, how are we going to change everything for the future? I think there's also like a period of kind of like forced isolation and reflection right now, and kind of forced solitude. And I think for me, the whole question of like, do we need to keep being productive and keep being in front of audiences right now and have something to say is also an interesting one, right? I mean, some people are like, maybe this is really just a time to like stop and be and observe and feel what's happening, and the like grief and the heartbreak right now and the strangeness, and also, for people who are lucky enough to have it, like the gift of some time to reflect and reflect on what our priorities are and what's important. And so I mean, we'll see how long this continues, and in the long term how people create new models. But I think also, in the book, there's this idea of the gift moves towards the empty place, right? And in some ways, we're kind of forced to this space of like more stillness, and in some ways, more kind of space right now. So it'll be interesting to see what comes through us.
Well, I'm curious. So, how are you within sort of the filmmaking space? How is it shifting your kind of artistic practice?
Well, I mean, I'm starting a new project that I was hoping to do a lot of shooting this summer. And so that's obviously been a huge question mark of like, when will it be safe? And, even if I'm in Canada and even if the borders are open, like, is it safe? Is it ethical? Does it make sense to go shoot? But I mean, meanwhile, it's a good time for like writing and development and editing. So I have a long-term project that I kind of managed to use this as a way to say, I'd really love some support to just finish this project that needs to be finished. And so I'm going to start editing. So it's a good time to kind of like deal with those things that have been waiting for a long time. And now that we have this space to be home and focused,
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that project is about?
Sure. It's called Medicine, and it's about doctors working with ayahuasca to treat people with addiction issues. And it's also in the kind of essay film vein, just kind of questioning the model of Western medicine and what's kind of missing from our approach and what we could learn from these deeper kind of soul medicines. So it's with Dr. Gabor Mate, kind of maverick doctor from Vancouver, and a French doctor in the Amazon in Peru who's been running this treatment center for 35 years. and who's had amazing results with people with addiction issues.
That's fascinating.
Long time, like more than 10 years in the making.
Wow. Yeah.
Back when no one knew what ayahuasca was.
Right. Where did you mostly travel to shoot that?
A little bit in Colombia and the Putumayo region. In Peru, it's kind of where the Andes meet the Amazon, the foothills of the Andes. And Vancouver with Gabor. And then things like the MAPS conference, which happens in California, right? San Jose, the Psychedelic Science Conference.
Wow. Cool. So what's your hope for this film, kind of long term, and how you hope people kind of utilize it or work with, are there specific communities or, as far, I know you talked a little bit about community screenings, what kind of communities you're seeing utilize the film and how they're kind of working with it?
Well, I think, I love connecting with communities in art schools, it's art students who are really grappling with these ideas and these practices in their lives. But I think I'm also seeing a lot of currents of just communities interested in alternative economies, and I think, there's Charles Eisenstein, who's written a lot about this idea of gift economies and gift circles. And there's definitely threads of thinking right now that are like, people are like deeply engaged with this question of like, this model has been broken for a long time, and what else could be possible? How could we frame things differently? How could we, structure ourselves differently? So I've seen all different kind of small local grassroots groups and groups of friends, like, and then, connected with like the whole worldwide Burning Man community on one level, and indigenous thinkers, it's like, it's an interesting intersection of, in Italy, like people connected to the housing movement. It's a film that branches in a lot of directions. So there's many conversations.
Great for outreach and marketing. There's a whole lot of niche audiences you can reach. I do have one more question from an audience member that wants to know what the best gift you've ever received.
Well, I have to say that there was a point when I didn't know if it would be possible for me to keep making this film. It was like the classic, like the young guy hosting the potlatch decided he was going to go ahead and do it before I really had the funding for the film. And I knew it was going to be essential for the film. And so I just kind of had to put it on my credit card and spent like many thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, and then kind of had a bit of a breakdown of like, oh my God, what have I done? And I connected with the whole community called Giftable. It was like a celebration of people working in the gift paradigm from all different countries, which was happening in Istanbul. So I met this amazing kind of gift tribe from all over the world. And I included a philanthropist who's a woman who's grew up in Texas and who's been a philanthropist who's supported a lot of this idea of women in the gift economy over the years. And she ended up giving me a big gift to keep going with the film that was really kind of a transformative step in, I'm in Canada and we do have more public funding for the arts, so it doesn't all depend on things like that, but it was really a point when I wasn't sure it was going to be possible. So it was a game changer.
And one other question, do teens resonate more with the film or older people, or have you noticed a difference in generations?
I don't know if I'd say there's like more one age group. I think it's been surprising. I wasn't sure if kids would be into it, but I've actually had some great screenings. We had a screening in Costa Rica. It was one of our first outdoor screenings with like howler monkeys in the trees, like under the stars. And there was a lot of kids kind of lying on the ground in front of the screen. And they were totally kind of mesmerized. And I realized that there are actually a lot of kids in the film. So I think, I think there's a sense that people closer to the millennial age, or maybe grow up with more skepticism of the whole kind of capitalist thing. But I think, I don't know, I think it's really seemed to touch people a lot of older people, and it's a lot of older people who take the trouble to come out to the cinema too. So
Right.
and stay for the Q&A. And
Right, and actually tell you those things for sure. Some of it is self-selecting. So, well, I just want to thank you so much for your time, Robin, and for talking with us tonight. And we look forward to that next film. And for those of you who either didn't get a chance to watch the film before this Q&A or wanted to watch it again, it will continue to be streaming on Rafael at Home. And certainly we encourage you to recommend it to more people in your community, your friends, your family, to take a look and spread the word about the gift economy and the beautiful gift film. Thanks, Robin. It's been a pleasure.
thank you so much.
Take care.